to be healed by the great physician we call Christ. So this all begins in the Old Testament, of course. And today we take a look at the book of 2 Chronicles. And 2 Chronicles is a book from the Old Testament that was written probably around 300 BC as we went forward in those years. And it was looking back at the history of Israel. So the book of Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, is really kind of a history book of the kings of Israel that ruled from the time before the exile to Babylon all the way to the rebuilding of the temple. And a lot of things in those books that you could read about. But the interesting thing to me is the way every story ends about every king of Israel. And that includes David and Solomon and all those great kings. But it always ends, the book of Chronicles always has this last thing to say, and it says this: but the king did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the point of 1st and 2nd Chronicles is that the political leaders of Israel were basically evil people. All of them were evil people. And they did evil things. And so therefore, Israel should not depend so highly upon their political leaders, but rather depend upon the presence of God in their lives. That was kind of the point of it all. But in the midst of all that negativeness about the kings of Israel and how bad they were and how selfish and self-centered they were, there was always this word of hope there. And this word of hope was that they could be, and all the people of Israel could be, healed of their sinfulness. And that was a great word of hope that comes to us from many books in the Old Testament, but especially this one. And this word of hope that comes to us is based upon people doing one thing. And so I'm going to read this to you now from 2 Chronicles, just a little part of it. But listen for this one thing that God requires of us to do if we are to be healed from our sinfulnesses. It's written this way. The Lord said, now whenever I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or I command the locusts to devour the land and send a plague among the people, whenever I show my anger and wrath to people, this is the good news. If my people in that time, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them from heaven, and I will forgive and heal their sins, and I will heal their land. Now my eyes will be open, and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place when my people become humble. Well, pretty easy to figure out what is the key word there. When my people become humble. When they quit thinking more highly of themselves than they ought to think. Then, the Lord says, I will be able to heal them. But in order to be healed, and this is the point from this Old Testament, we got to realize that we're not the perfect people we think we are. We got to realize that we're not the wonderful, glorious people that we think we are. We got to realize that in every human heart, there is this desire to live for ourselves. Everybody does that. And that's called sickness in the Bible. And so everybody is sick then, basically. But we got to realize it and humble ourselves. And so that's the great message from this reading from Chronicles. Now we move forward into the New Testament material. And there we have this little letter which I think is a really great letter. It's called the Letter of James. Very small little book. And when they were originally deciding on what books would be in the Bible, and that was in 311 AD at the Council of Hippo. I can always remember the name of that council. The Council of Hippo. The great church leaders had two books that they wanted to not put in the Bible. And those two books were the letter of James and the book of Revelation. They didn't want either one of those because they felt like they were not what Christianity ought to be about. Well, I'm thankful that by one or two votes, those books did get into our scriptures, and they have great messages for us. And I think now, after all the years of studying it, we can see how important those two books actually really are to the message that Christianity has. But anyway, this one from James, the major emphasis of it, and it's probably one of the only books in the Bible that really emphasizes this, and that is the idea that you've got to act on your faith. Just hearing the word, just saying you're a believer, just doing that is no good. It's not going to do anything for anybody or you or anyone else. You've got to act on what you believe. And that's what the little book of James is really all about. You've got to act on what you believe. You don't want to be a hearer only. Now, the problem with the Christians in the first century AD was that many of them were very content to listen to the message, to sing the hymns, and to pray. But after they left the gathering, they were the same old people they had always been. It was a real problem. Because Christianity was proclaiming this change, this renewal, this new people, this new deal, this new being. And the people in the society said, well, it seems like it's the same old crowd. Yep, it is. Well, James writes about that, and he tries his best to convince people that what you got to do is you got to act on your faith, and you've got to move away from your selfish life. So let me read this little bitty part, and you can hear the power in his writing to get this message across. He says to those who were that way, he says, listen, don't live the way you are. Come near to God, and He will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify, you hearts, you double-minded people. Grieve and mourn and wail for your human condition. Change your laughter into mourning and your joy into gloom. And humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will raise you up. That's the real truth of the gospel. And the message, of course, once again, is that the action we must take is not just to believe that God believes we can be holy people. We got to try to be holy people, you see. If God believes we can do it, then who are we to doubt it? That's kind of the message there. And so if God believes you can be new and be different and be something other than what general humans are, if you believe that God believes that, and if you believe in God, then God will lift you up. He will take you from being humble and lift you up. So that's another great message that we have coming to us from the New Testament this time. And then finally, our great gospel lesson for today. We're studying the Gospel of Mark. And so as is our custom, we rise when we read the gospel. So please rise up with me. And let me read this gospel to you today from the Gospel of Mark, verses 13 through 17, where it says, once again, Jesus went outside by the lake, and a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Goes up to him and he says, "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Now, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and eating with his disciples as well. For there were many tax collectors and sinners who followed him. And when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does your master eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Amen. Right, quickly, there are 3 words here in this gospel reading that are very important for us to know and to understand. The first one is tax collectors. The second one is the phrase, follow me. And the third one is the name sinners. We must understand what all 3 of those mean so we can understand what the gospel means. First of all, who was a tax collector in those days? A tax collector was a person who went to work for the Roman government collecting taxes. The Roman government had occupied Jerusalem for almost 85 years by that time. And the way the tax collectors would collect the taxes, they would take a big club, a bat, and some very strong men, and they would go out and beat people until they felt like they'd gotten everything from them they could get. They took 10 or 20% of that for themselves and gave the rest to the Roman government. Now, you can imagine if you were occupied by a foreign country and their soldiers were ruining your lives and their occupation was ruining your nation, you would not look too kindly upon a Jewish person who decided to go to work for the Roman authorities, beating up his neighbor to collect money. That was Levi. Yeah, that's what he was doing. And everybody was afraid of Levi and his thugs. And so when Jesus walks up to the Levi and says, follow me, the crowd must have gone, of all the people who are you asking to follow you, this man's a tax collector. Well, in a bigger sense, the word tax collector really means anyone who takes advantage of their neighbor. Anyone who takes advantage of another human being. Anyone who fails to help their neighbor in whatever way they can. Anyone who tries to squeeze out of their neighbor any benefit they can get for themselves. We probably have a lot of tax collectors today. But anyway, that's what a tax collector is. Then comes the expression, follow me. That doesn't mean just walk behind me. That's what a lot of people think. It means just walk behind me, follow me around. No, to follow me means to imitate me. It means to do as I do and say as I do. And so he's telling this man, who is obviously interested in himself and getting everything for himself he can, and using other people to get everything he can for himself, he says to him, follow me, live like I live, talk like I live, do like I do. That's what he's saying. So that's going to be an important part of our message today, is to understand when Jesus calls us and says to follow me, that's what he really means, is to speak like me, act like me, do like me, be like me. Okay, and then finally when we come to the word sinners. And we have to understand, what does that word sinners mean? Well, in the day of Jesus, it meant someone who tried to live life by themselves without God. That was a sinner. Anybody who took control of their own life and decided for themselves what was best for themselves and decided to do what they wanted to do, anybody that did that, anybody that lived a selfish life, that was a life that was not concerned about others and their miseries and whatever there was that was hurting people in the world, but only concerned about themselves, their family, their wealth, their money, only concerned about doing what they themselves thought was the right thing to do, that's a sinner. Anybody who lives for themselves and does what they think is the right thing to do. So we got to keep that little definition in mind when we talk about sinners. So these are the messages then that we have from the scriptures today. And now we go back and look at the key verses, and we read them both in English and in Spanish. So let's start first of all with the Old Testament reading, and it is in English this way. If my people will humble themselves and pray, I will forgive their sins. And then from James we have these words. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. And And now the Spanish, I forgot that. There you go. Sorry about that. Humílense ante el Señor, y Él los exaltará. And then the last one from the Gospel, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. No he venido a llamar a los justos, sino a los pecadores.